Yes, figures.
Thank you.
So this is a very modern way of having a panel. So we don't have a moderator, but I kind of took charge to at least kind of get us started. My name is Helienne Lindvall, and we got Benji, and we've got Michelle Kadir, Benji Rogers, that is. And I figured we'd kind of, since we don't have a moderator, we'd kind of kick it off with introducing ourselves and telling the audience a bit about what we do.
Perfect. But I think ladies first,
Okay.
right?
Michelle?
Sure. So as you heard, I'm the VP Digital Business at Sony Music Sweden. And previously at Spotify for 6 years, and I've been at Sony for 1 year. And I head up a team of 15 fantastic people. And we do a variety of things, obviously. But the 3 things that I would say is the most relevant to highlight for this panel and for you and the crowd is 3 focus areas I would want to mention. And the first one is data scientists. The second is creatives. And the third thing is relationships. I'll go into this, but I just want to introduce myself and my team with that.
Cool. Thanks. Benji Rogers. I founded a company called PledgeMusic about 7 years ago after having an extremely interesting career as an artist. Basically ended up massively in debt, couldn't figure out why, and figured there must be a better way. So we do about 1,000 albums a year through Pledge, and it's a way of artists being able to, take the recording process and make money out of it in pre-orders. And then before that, as I said, I was a musician. And then just recently, I discovered this technology in the blockchain, and we created a thing called the Blockchain Music Project, which is going to attempt to build a global distributed database of rights every time a song is encoded and created. And I'm also on the board of the Future Music Coalition. So basically, I want to find ways to get artists paid as quickly and as efficiently as possible without doing all the work for them.
My name is Helienne Lindvall. I'm a songwriter. I've been working as a musician pretty much most of my life. And I started writing a column for the Guardian newspaper because I live in London. And I started talking to all the different stakeholders in the music industry and realized quite quickly a lot of issues that we had in common and a lot of problems that we had in common, in particular when it comes to the new or the semi-new digital space that we find ourselves in. And then I met Nicholas Molinder from Auddly, who kind of suddenly taught me more about the rights of us songwriters. And to refer to what you're talking about, I realized that a large part, or a big reason why we don't get paid properly is because we don't have our metadata in order. And we kind of realized that it should actually be, with the digital space, it should be easier to find metadata, but it's turned out that it's become a bit of a mess.
Yep.
And what we did with Auddly was trying to kind of figure out how can we get musicians to kind of get their metadata in order without it feeling like they're doing admin, because nobody wants to do admin. Nobody becomes a musician to become an administrator. So that's kind of what's been our aim with Auddly. And
Cool.
actually the laureate Max Martin is a partner in the company, and so is Björn Ulvaeus. So.
Yeah, I would say that definitely the metadata is lacking in the industry, and what's the problem is basically we don't have a standardized format or a standardized way of working. However, on the positive side, we have more data than ever in history. And that data is amazing because we can, in very new ways, provide insights through that data to our artists, which is our #1 mission. So we just 6 months ago released an app that each and every artist in our label have access to, and they can basically see everything from how much did I stream yesterday, this song, is it more women or men that's listening to it, or what age is it, how am I doing on social media, what radio stations are playing my songs, the heat map over all the world. That type of access was impossible 10 years ago, 20 years ago. It's now a reality. And that type of data and insights provides another type of question and another type of, you could say, position, because now you can talk about, okay, so what do we do from here, instead of talking about like, oh, but how is it going? I don't really know, I'm unsure. So that's on the positive side when it comes to data.
So one of the most, I'm sure you didn't come to a panel expecting to talk about metadata. And there's really no way to make metadata sexy, except potentially.
We're trying.
Yeah, no. The way that we would work with my band, just on a basic level, was I had this epiphany when I was maybe 19 or 20 playing in bands. I can't tell the people at the show, so if there were never this many people there, but let's say the first few rows, I could never tell them all when I was playing next. There was no way. So first I set up a voicemail number and figured, well, I'll just, we'll give flyers out, and then you'll know when the next show is. This is, pre-internet days, or early internet days, CompuServe 101 dot whatever it was. So, and it worked quite well. And then when email addresses started to come along, it was like, great, we can email everybody. So my trick to make metadata sexy to my bandmates was there were 4 of us, and we had massive, massive drinking problems in the band. So every night,
very unusual.
Yeah, I know, right? Strange. Every night after the gig, we'd come off stage, and the person with the least number of names on the email list bought the entire band's bar tab. So it was like a month's rent. And what that meant was we gathered a map of everyone who was interested enough to kind of talk to us afterwards. We'd log if they'd bought a CD and if they hadn't. And I realized that we were sitting on, by the end of a couple of tours, a few thousand pieces of data that were valuable in that when we were going back through that, you could recontact them. The modern day equivalent of that is a lot more sophisticated. I got burned on MySpace on a ways back. But artists still today shovel their information to third-party platforms. Labels do it as well, and it's not, Spotify has more data on artists than most artists do, actionable in
I know a lot of it,
certain ways.
Like with Facebook, where in particular when they changed their algorithm of how you could push out your next gig to your fans, it completely took some bands by surprise.
That was called the big bait and switch. Come build your empire on our platform, and then we're going to charge you to reach all of your people. But look, they're a social network, that's their business. But the fundamentals of how, so if you want to become a superstar, there are multiple routes to this, right? And I think that you've got to decide a superstar like a Katy Perry or, that's as many as I know, I guess.
Some of your artists.
Yeah,
Sony,
but if you want to become Beyonce, whatever it is, it's a very different game than it is to go on tour and be successful, or be a successful songwriter, or a musician performing in an orchestra, or those are different routes. But the fundamentals are the same in that if you can connect with a portion of your fan base in a very meaningful way, the tools are extraordinary that we have today, way beyond my voicemail and my clipboard. Back in the day. And so it can be really fun and interesting. I would say that the biggest pothole you can fall into is relying too much on social networks and streaming platforms to be the conduit between you and your fans. 2 real-world examples I'll give is Ryan Leslie built an app called Superphone, and he makes $2 million per album cycle from 15,000 of his fans. And that's an extraordinary number. The 85, and that's from roughly, I think it's like, maybe 10 or 15% of the actual users of it. Another app called EscapeX, which is basically like artist-focused apps, they skim revenue that would normally go for social network ads into the artist account. So for every 1 million users you have on your social following, it's 18,500 daily active users, which is $11,000 a month in revenue. So again, found money that is outside of traditional ecosystems.
But of course, you're still relying on an app that might not be there tomorrow. So I mean, I would say that email, the good old email address is still, I would say, the most important thing for an artist to keep track of.
Ryan would argue phone number as well, which I think phone number and messaging, like the ability to in-message with fans is going to become extraordinarily helpful, particularly with AI help and with kind of the bots that you're going to be able to pull kind of actions into, like, the ability to tell 100,000 of your Spotify listeners that you have a show coming up and that you can basically they can text ticket and it will get to them. That's extraordinary, and we're there at the moment. It's just not, it's not evenly distributed, I'd say.
So for us, I would say we've identified 3, for now, really critical areas when it comes to creating a superstar. And so number 1 is the data and insights that I've mentioned already. As a part of that, when it comes to the future, is that we're currently working on a model we're loosely calling the predictive model, which basically is that you can look at history of X amount of songs, and then you can look at a new release song and see how they're progressing the first 3 days or 5 days or 2 weeks. And then you can basically, based on that, project the life cycle for that song. And the information that that gives you is that you can, instead of just like letting that happen and do the regular things, you will understand, okay, this type
What are the regular things, though?
So, I mean, the regular thing that you've done like in the past history, such as the classical putting someone on TV or, pitching to a media outlet, or PR. The regular things. So instead of that, you can do injections, and where in the life cycle you see that, okay, this is needed to kind of change the trajectory to make it even better or different. So that's one part. The other part that is kind of connected to your question was that we also have you could call it an in-house agency. We call it the creatives. And their sole mission is to cut through the noise, because obviously more people are listening to more music than ever. More music is being released. And we have a democratic system. Anyone can put out music in the world. Fantastic. But it's also tougher than ever, because as consumers, we have more to consume than ever. So you need to kind of find innovative ways to reach the new and existing fans. So we have a team just focusing on that, and that's been very good for our artists. And the third thing is obviously the relationship, it's not to underestimate the relationship with the big platforms such as the Spotify's, YouTubes, and Apples. And we know also that playlists are becoming the new radio, and we see that very clearly here in the Nordics, but it's also like spreading throughout the world. That is the new way people are listening and finding music. So obviously that type of outlet is extremely important. So that is what's forming superstars, as we're calling it in this panel today. But there's also much more to come, I would say, in the future, because we'll have even more data, and everything will be much more transparent. So I think that it's only the beginning, basically, on how you can, in different ways, create and help artists to kind of become big.
I think that I heard somewhere actually on a Swedish radio show, because you mentioned the word transparent, which they said was, they called it the new corporate bullshit word. Because it can mean anything. Like everyone is transparent today in some way or another. And I think that it's something that would be very important. What is transparency? I mean, YouTube say they're transparent, and I know as somebody who has music on YouTube that certainly how I get paid is completely opaque.
Yes.
Or how little I get paid, or why, and if I question anything, there's never really an answer that is that I can understand or accept even. I think that what is important in the future for music creators is to take charge as much as possible of the information that is out there, and the information that we actually can supply to companies like Spotify and whatever.
There's one thing I'll say too, because the data and kind of getting your digital house in order is extraordinarily important. I once watched like an hour-long lecture of an SEO expert, and you've really got to be into it, right?
SEO is search engine optimization.
And what was amazing was he gave all these principles, and he gave the reasons why if you did X, Y, and Z, you could do this. And he basically, like for an hour, and at the very end he said, the last slide was, or just make something excellent, and you can break every single rule. And then he pushed a cat video up that had like 40 million views, and you're like, oh,
I thought you were supposed to put something excellent.
Yeah, but the point was, is something that I shared just yesterday a picture of this little kid has a Spider-Man piñata, and his parents are trying to get him to beat the piñata and he just goes over and hugs it. And he can't stop. And you're crying. You're like, this is incredible. And you're watching just every time I go back, another 100, 200, 300,000 people do it. I don't think that we have the tools and data, correct me if I'm wrong, but to polish a turd, as you would say, and if something's not getting traction, don't just try and do more of it or spend against it. That's not how these superstars, I think emerge.
But it's also sad saying that, because that means that every artist that hasn't braked wasn't a good artist.
No.
Which is also not true.
That wasn't what I meant. What I meant was the line to the superstardom. More what I meant is you can break a huge amount of rules if what you do is exciting, interesting, fascinating. Ryan Lewis and Macklemore are an amazing example of this. It was completely organically built. When a label came along to them and said, you should sign, instead of saying, yes, we want to sign to you, Warner Brothers, they said, we want to hire your radio department. Warner Brothers said, yes. These guys, because what they both realized was, there are thousands of people showing up at our show. Our digital house is in order. We've got all this going on. We don't need to go that traditional route. I'm not suggesting for a minute that you've got to do cat videos to be famous.
That's fantastic.
But a large time what it is the role, we see on our platform thousands of artists sign up. And the first thing they say is, I want $50,000 because I want to hire a publicist and do this, 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 and this. And you look at the numbers on their social networks and you listen to the music and you say, no. You need to either go back in the studio and work on this more, or you need 50 more fans at your show. You need to be so it's difficult to ignore you.
But isn't it difficult as a musician to know when something, that's obviously a lot what record labels do, because a lot of the time you do think that what you've done is fantastic, even if another, so where do you kind of draw that line? Where do you say, okay, so
when did you quit?
Yeah. So. Or
when do you have to go back in the studio? I think that
it's a great. So, I think that what happens is sometimes you emerge later, and that's okay. Today's system is not really geared for that. When you would sign a band in the 70s or the 60s, there would be a couple of albums before that.
David Bowie, my favorite artist of all time.
And
three albums.
And we don't have that today. There isn't as much time, or you got to prove yourself in different ways, but there are very few, I should say, labels that will sit there and nurture slowly talent to get it through this.
But I think it's fantastic that music is out there in early stages, and then you can follow. I mean, if I discover an artist today and I see that there's been 2 albums previously, I mean, that's just good, because then I can see the development. And I think that it shouldn't be a limitation for any artist that want to put up music out there. The only thing they need to know is, okay, what's the landscape and how hard is it, right?
Yeah.
So I wouldn't want to be a barrier of that.
So one of the ways that, because I agree with you, one of the ways that we approach this just on this platform level, the pledge that I founded was a certain amount of people will commit money to artists. They will. The average on our site spends $55 per transaction, right? So when you think about that, you go, and this is my logic. So basically what I did was...
But you have to be at a certain level to even then do that.
So on my level, my small band level of touring around for years and gathering email lists, I knew people liked it, right? But it wasn't going to go to that next level. I made a personal choice to start a tech company, which is another story. But I know a bunch of my friends did everything they could but go to their fans. They were like, they would sign the worst deals in history, just anything to be taken to the next level. When I went to their shows and I watched, the first few hundred people were like desperate to be a part of that story. So with Ryan Leslie, again, he was a major label artist. He didn't like the way that worked out for him, so he created his own career through this path. But we see on our platform thousands of artists emerging out of who you would never think to sign. And what happens is, so if we launch 1,000 artists, let's say that there's a bunch of them who want to raise $2,000 or $5,000 or $10,000. If a $2,000 artist suddenly gets to 15 or 20,000, you go, whoa, did we get the prediction wrong or what happened? And it's normally because something's happening. The trouble is it's a very blunt tool. So if you send out to 1,000 of your fans and they don't show up, it's telling you something. It's data. It's basically saying, oh, even your mom's not supporting this. Like, what's going on?
I mean,
not to say that you never should. I don't want that to come across. But what it is I looked at the number of fans I had, what they spent. I made my first EP in profit, which was a nice thing to do, and I didn't have to pay for my CD on. I pushed it out, but what I realized was it was all uphill at that point. There was no sort of downhill. The message wasn't getting there. Now, maybe I'll go back to it someday. I don't know. Tech companies are fun and interesting as well. But
well, of course it is. Not everybody can be, not everybody can make a living off of music. So
or starting a tech company.
Or a tech company.
Yeah, yeah, that's a fair point.
So maybe. God, there was something I was going to say about your. I think that what you're saying about asking or getting in touch with. I think for some people, it feels like talking about money as a creator can be a bit of a hurdle, where you feel like you're begging if you're asking them to pay for stuff.
But you ask them to, yeah.
But it's also about how you, like, I think it's a lot about, like, we had a lot of focus groups before we created the app, and we talked with artists, and we're like, how are you getting the information today? How are you looking at your royalty payments, like you're getting in the, a bunch of papers, basically. And they were saying, like, I just give it to my accountant and I never look at it. And that was, like, the answer we got in almost every focus group. Like, I don't even understand it. And that's a problem.
Which is true. It is like reading Turkish.
Exactly, and that's our fault from the beginning, like the label's history's fault. Like, why do we send a huge amount of piece of paper like this that's it's hard to understand, right? So in the app, for instance, at the moment, you can super easily see, like, okay, this amount of money I got from streaming, this is from breakage, this is from download, this is how much I've recouped, this is how much is left, and it's data can be sexy, it's very sexy, and it's very easy, and all artists have said, like, wow, okay, I get this. I would never understood this before. So I think I agree with you that you can't put, you should put the pressure on the musicians, like they need to take responsibility to understand everything, but it's also been on our end to kind of make that easy and simple.
Absolutely.
And now I think that we're in a state where it is easy and simple. So I think that relationship will also be better and information will be shared in another way.
I mean, I would say that is probably more possible on the artist side than on the songwriter side at the moment. As a songwriter, and I would say now when I've actually come over to the metadata side, and I think it's sexy, or at least I think it's important. That is very difficult to get the information, and I've also realized obviously that the connection between me and my publisher, and the connection between me and STIM, which is the performing rights organization that would collect the money and give it to me, is a bit broken as a songwriter. Most songwriters I know probably go, if they go on the STIM side or PRS, which is the English version, or ASCAP in America, maybe a couple of times a year, because it feels like admin, it's hard to navigate, and I think that the key for us in the future is to make metadata comprehensible and not make it feel like admin, feel like it's a part of your creative process. I mean, I know with us, with Auddly, what we've done is I call it it's a music rights metadata hub disguised as a tool for musicians. So once you've registered all your IDs in there, or your one ID if you're a songwriter, which is your IPI number, then everything you work on, that number will be attached to it. So
persistence,
yeah, exactly. So you don't have to think about it. And then when you collaborate with people, you add them and their IPI number, which is underneath. Actually, you just add their name, but their number and identification is underneath it. Because I realized that a lot of these, I mean, I have colleagues, a lot of us that are very, very disappointed in the revenue that we get, for example, from your old employer. And I've realized that part of that is that the metadata, that our information is not there.
From the beginning.
I have also realized, however, that a lot of these companies are not very good at ingesting that data. And as you started off by saying, it's because our systems don't talk to each other.
We call it shit in, shit out.
Yeah, exactly. And that's exactly. And if we put shit in, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
That's what we're gonna get back.
The analogy I like to give is when your FedEx driver shows up, you've written the wrong address and you yell at FedEx for sending it to the wrong place. You're like, what's wrong with you, you know? But also it's worth looking at, like, if you were to fix one piece of a song in YouTube today, you would have to broadcast that information to 150 different databases. Through various emails, faxes, phones.
What do you mean by fix?
So basically, if you were to like assign, if you were to basically, someone's using a song, you associate yourself with that in YouTube in the back end. How does everyone else know?
Yeah.
They just don't, unless you tell them. And then who are you to tell them, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I think that is a lot too. What is your verification? Like, how do you? Yeah. Is your word reliable?
Yeah. And luckily, there's a lot of people working on this right now, myself included. I think you guys are working on a version of it. I mean, everyone's gathering towards the same thing, and multiple scenarios in this instance have failed too. Yeah, there's
so many layers that needs to be fixed before we're done. Yeah. And I'm just happy if it can, like, people like us in the crowd, we should kind of inspire things to happen. I'm so happy that just like, I talked to the Per Sundin, the CEO of Universal Music here in Sweden just last week, and he was like, we're going to build the same app just because you guys did. And I just think that that's fantastic and that's success, because that means that more artists will get that type of transparency, and that type of data, et cetera, which is just like perfect. Then we need to get all the other, like the Stims but also the YouTubes, et cetera, to kind of level up all their type of information output to the different
I do think
partners.
that on the songwriter side, it is a lot. I mean, I talk to more and more the way that writing a song happens in today's environment is so different from only like 10, 15 years ago when I was writing. Now, a lot of the times, like we would sit in, like with Auddly, you'd kind of start off 3 people in the studio, split it 3 ways. Usually that would be the case. But then it gets sent out to a third, or if we've done a track, that gets sent out to 3 or 4 people. Yeah. And what happens a lot in dance music is then they might take the verse from one person, the chorus from one person, the bridge from another, and now suddenly you have to start negotiating who's going to get what. And then the artist comes in, and the artist changes a word and wants a third. And you kind of have
that seems fair.
Then... that never happens.
No, but that's
and suddenly you've got that nobody gets paid. I mean, I had the head of PRS, Robert Ashcroft, the CEO, said that not the latest. I don't know what's happening with the latest Beyoncé album, but the previous Beyoncé album, 18 months after it had been released, nobody had been paid of the songwriters because the splits were still in dispute, and that is just not. I mean, it's not acceptable.
And what do you think needs to happen there?
Well, so, I mean, the way we're trying to solve it is that instead of all these people having their separate conversations about which I know with A&Rs in publishing now, they try to kind of unravel this whole thing after the songwriter said, you deal with it. If you kind of start it off in one place, and every conversation, everyone that gets added in a transparent way, because a lot of times now I have colleagues where they look at the registration and they're like, oh, well, the choreographer of the band is added to my song, and they had no idea. And suddenly there's like 15 people. But if you have it in one place where when you know if anybody gets added, that everyone can have a chance to kind of say yes or no. Because with Auddly you actually have to accept or decline. So I think that's the only, if everybody knows that that's the only way you're going to get paid, then people will try to
with a minute left, should we look to the future?
I think that's what we were talking about, this whole
So you were saying, I mean, I'll ask, I'm not moderating, but what are the most important things that an artist and or songwriter needs to have in place to become a Swedish superstar?
I think an artist definitely needs to have the right people around them. And what we are working with in our team and in my company is basically to have the best team that can help an artist in different ways. And the couple of things that I mentioned was that, but I think data and insights will be the most prominent way to kind of, set a journey for an artist. I think without that, then it's not a good situation. So AI into that as well.
AI.
Yeah.
I'll just make it simple because we've got very little time. That artists need to take responsibility for their music business. At least maybe spend 20 minutes a day where they can kind of look over that everything is where it should be and their rights are actually looked after.
Yeah. And I'll end with they got to know who their fans are and how to directly connect with them. 17% of all music fans represent 61% of all music revenue. So if you can tap those super fans, you're going to be in good shape. And get ready for VR and the blockchain.
That's virtual reality, and yeah, that would be a whole other panel. Well, thank you very much for sitting in with us in our discussion.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, guys.